Hello. Well, as a matter of fact, I was going to discuss this. And then I realised from some of the comments under my last video that I shall also have to discuss this. But don't worry, because it's the same thing. And it is actually the same thing as this. This is a paint, and it just shows how these things are as old as civilization. This is a painting by Hieronymus Bosch. It's called The Conjurer. And here you have this man, if you notice, even in the Bosch, 15th century, even in the 15th century, conjurers wore top hats. I didn't know that. But here this conjurer is making these magic tricks with these little silver balls, and this credulous old man is leaning over, peering at the trick the magician is doing. And here we have this man, perhaps in collusion with the conjurer himself, stealing the old man's purse. And there's a child here who might be stealing something from an inner pocket as well. But certainly this guy is a pickpocket. And you might say he's very soberly dressed. He's wearing clothing that almost looks clerical. I'm not sure, but the sort of clothing he's wearing is semi-clerical. And he's wearing glasses as well. So he looks extremely respectable. He looks like somebody who might be employed by the church for clerical duties, even if he's not a churchman himself, and he's a pickpocket. So this is a pillar of society who's a pickpocket, most likely working in collusion with this magician, who's distracting people with his tricks. Distraction is a commonality of human life and especially of governments. They use it. This isn't called distraction with magic. It's got another name. Misdirection, that's what it's called. Yes, of course. So they use this as a means of directing people away. Sometimes this is quite murderous, like we all know in the 1930s, Hitler and the Nazi Party were using Jews and gypsies as a misdirection for the problems the German people were having. It took their minds off their own failure to handle their economy. Actually, Jews have been quite commonly blamed in many cases throughout European history, but there have also been other blamees, of course. Now let's just talk about this. You see, I made a video about this killing of Rayshard Brooks. And I said that the policeman kicked Brooks when he had been shot and was on the ground. And I said that wasn't very nice, but that was a separate issue. And I got a lot of people making comments to point out to me that the only proof that Rolf had actually kicked Brooks was a still photo, not a video, that the district attorney had said this proved he was kicking Brooks, when it was a still photo, and looking at the photo you can't tell whether Rolf was just stepping over Brooks or maybe jumping over Brooks. It seemed to me it's a very fuzzy photo, and if Brooks is there, he's actually behind Rolf. The sort of kick that Rolf might be applying, he's not in the right position. If his leg swung forward now, it would be swinging in front of Brooks, by the looks of things. So it's not really possible to know whether he was kicking Brooks or not. But as I keep saying, this is the distraction technique. We have people here arguing about whether Rolfe kicked Brooks, instead of arguing about why Brooks was shot in the first place. And there are more people who seem to be concerned about this, which is a minutiae, a very small part of the story. Because whether Rolfe kicked Brooks or not is completely unimportant. Unimportant to the story of whether Brooks should have been shot in the first place. In my opinion, I don't know whether Rolfe could have shot at his legs rather than his body. But I hadn't just been punched to the ground by a fit young man who was obviously intent on running away with a police weapon. And it's very difficult to know what sort of choices you make when you're in that position. But instead of arguing about this and talking about this, they're talking about whether he actually kicked Brooks later on. Well, that's a distraction. Nobody should be talking about it. It's not the issue. The doorbell went. So, sorry about that. Now, this photo is a distraction. What's happened is this. You've got a man who has a criminal record, who was drunk in charge of a motor vehicle, and who was arrested, and who put up a fight, and who got shot in the course of that fight. That's what happened. What happened after that is a disciplinary matter. What also happened is that the black community around him are protecting and sanctifying him. And that's also a distraction. Now, it's interesting. You're not getting people like Tom Sowell or Walter Williams being called on to defend this man and say how terrible was his death. Any death is terrible. But the outrage for it is completely out of proportion to what happened. It wasn't like the police suddenly took off after an innocent man walking across a car park and shot at him. You're not getting, as I say, people like Tom Sowell defending Rayshard Brooks. You're getting people who come from his social level, and that's it. But the media are talking that up as if it was the entire black community. That's a distraction. Stoking the embers, blowing on the embers of the racial divide in America, and there still is a racial divide. Blowing on the embers to spark them into a proper fire is what those media people want to do. They don't care about Rayshard Brooks. What they care about is stopping Trump from being elected. And the only way they feel they can do that, because they can't win in any other sort of an argument, who have they got heading their campaign? A man who can hardly remember what day of the week it was. I thought I was bad, but he's 1,000 times worse, and I wouldn't have run for the presidency. They can't win the argument, so they're trying to create mayhem instead. And this is one way of doing it. And they can't even really justify this shooting. So what they're doing is they're picking on a small incident that happened afterwards that may or may not have happened afterwards, and they're getting people to argue about that as if that was the whole thing. It wasn't. It wasn't anything to do with the whole thing. The thing was the shooting. And the shooting happened because he was shooting at the police. And he was shooting at the police because he was drunk and they were trying to arrest him. And instead of his community saying, well, those are the breaks, now let's see whether that officer behaved properly afterwards. No, they're turning this into a sacrifice. Now, I want to talk about something else. Let's look at another distraction. Because for those of you in America who don't know, this woman is called Shamima Begum. She is or was a British citizen. When she was 15, she went to ISIS. She married an ISIS fighter. I don't know why I'm calling him a fighter. She married an ISIS murderer. She herself became involved in the ISIS social setup. I believe she was part of the modesty police or something. And when ISIS lost, she expressed an interest in coming back to England. And a lot of people said, that's not reasonable. Here we are. So, she has now applied for legal aid, which is, I believe, public in America. What do you call it? Public assistance for public legal aid or something. Anyway, she's applied for that to fight for her right to have her British citizenship reinstated, because our previous Home Secretary stripped her of the British citizenship, saying she was a Bangladeshi citizen and she could go there if she wanted. He wasn't rendering her stateless, but he reckoned that she was a danger to the British public if she came back. She's now applied for legal aid and it looks like she's going to get it. It also looks like she's going to win her fight to come back to Britain. And this is causing the newspapers a lot of discussion time and discussion pages. Meanwhile, we have this. This is a photograph from the Daily Telegraph. You see, what's happened is this. Because there have been fewer lorries coming into Britain from the continent, and because there are more controls on such lorries coming in with the COVID regulations, migrants are setting off from the coast of France in boats. In many cases, they're being escorted by French Navy boats to the middle of the Channel, where they're left for the British Navy boats to come and pick them up out of humanitarian principles. This is something that Nigel Farage has been talking about. He actually went down to the coast, to the south coast, and he watched these people being brought in, hundreds of them. If we take a look at them, judging from the women's headscarves and the general darker colours of the people who are in that boat, they're mostly from the Middle East or southern Eastern Europe. Well, they could all be Syrian refugees. Equally, they could be ISIS escapees, couldn't they? And here, people we know have come from Syria, from fighting in Syria, and have returned to Britain. These aren't just these these boat people here, these are people who came legitimately. And that's all that we know about. Because, as it says here, many foreigners who travelled to Iraq and Syria to join IS did so secretly. And then they came back secretly. King's College shows an estimated 52,000 men, women and children travelled to or were born into the areas of Iraq and Syria under IS control between 2013 and 2018. Of these, it says, about a fifth have returned home or are trying to do so. There are also thought to be several hundred women and children from EU countries who've made their own way back. Returning Western European nationals as of July 2019. So we are taking these people into the country almost on a daily basis. And yet this is what people are talking about. It's a distraction technique. This is one woman who's become high profile because some journalist tracked her down in a displaced persons camp. These people are coming in here all the time. We have to be aware of distractions. Why don't you treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of promotional merchandising? The Grannyopteryx t-shirt or the Granbo mug, which comes in 2 flavours, with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. And whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.